So everyone, we're on to our last session of the day. This is a panel. It's about the best ways to grow your revenue in new markets. It's going to be moderated by Kaley Hurst, so I'll welcome her to the team in a moment from Poll to Win. But we've also got, I think, Alicja from 966 and Oliver from W3 Play. Do we have Hytham in the audience? We think not. Okay, in that case, we'll move on without him. If Hytham arrives, we can squeeze him onto the stage, but it looks like we're going to be a slightly reduced panel.
Well, we are competing with already happy hours and everything,
Oh, no!
So maybe we lost him there.
Maybe that's where he is. He's just outside watching this. Anyway, over to you. Thank you very much. Well, everyone, a round of applause for our panel to get them started. And yeah, we'll hand over to you. You've got your thing?
Yep. Go for it. Small but mighty. And we'll try to end on time so everyone can get to their own happy hours. I'm Kaley from PTW over sales and marketing. And I'll let the panelists introduce themselves.
Well, my name is Alicja. I'm at 966. We're a Saudi company, and we're basically building the gaming ecosystem in Saudi Arabia.
My name is Oliver Kern. I've been in the games industry for about 20 years or something, and see myself a bit of a veteran. I've seen all the good, the bad, the ugly. And yeah, happy to be on this panel.
Yeah. So of course our topic is best way to grow your revenue in new markets. So wanted to start with what are the emerging markets in games right now?
Well, definitely one of the big ones right now, and the ones that you hear a bit more about is the MENA market, which is growing very rapidly. Also, Saudi Arabia is investing a lot of money into growing the gaming industry. So I think it's definitely an interesting place to look at and to take into consideration when you want to grow your mobile game.
Yeah, I think beyond that, this is definitely one of the growing markets. If you look at what some of the smart people like Newzoo or wherever kind of predict growth, it is definitely the MENA region. It's also to a degree LATAM, and there is also in some countries in Southeast Asia some growth that is expected. So I think there are definitely opportunities. Whereas the very established markets like US and Europe, it's brutally hard.
Yeah, quite saturated. So how do you pick the right market for your game?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, I guess. I mean, what I've always done is, you have to kind of first look at your game and where it fits, right? So that means you have to do some kind of desktop research, use a tool like, I don't know, Sensor Tower or Data.ai or whatever you have at your disposal, but something that basically gives you an indication, not what your game is doing there, that's obviously something that but you also want to see okay, is there opportunity in this genre? Are there other games that I see as a benchmark that I could also compete with in that region? And are they doing maybe something different or infinitely better? So I mean, I remember when I also looked at MENA at some point. The top successful games in MENA were all localized to Arabic, right? Which is obviously, we know, big effort, etc. But, it doesn't come by accident, so to say. But I think you have to do that research first.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to understand which genres are popular, what is the competition, what do the players like, and compare it to also your data. And if you already went global, we can already see whether what's the ARPDAU, what's the retention in those specific markets, and based on that you can make some decisions whether it's worth actually putting some more effort into localizing, culturalizing the game, if there's potential, basically.
Yeah. I think it'd be nice to only discuss the positive aspect of entering new markets, but I'm sure you guys both also have some input on maybe the perils of entering new markets and maybe doing it improperly or without enough thought and planning. Anything you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I mean, I've seen it go well and also go really bad. I mean, I worked for a company for quite a while where we basically went into LATAM and doubled down there, especially in Brazil, because we saw some like initial really good evidence, and we're able to also with investing into that market with like a local team, etc. We're able to really pull it off and grow substantially there, and thought like, okay, this is the playbook for that type of game. Let's replicate that and try to do that also in MENA. We did consider like different avenues, like go with a publisher maybe to kind of spin it out. But in this case, we then decided like, okay, no, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set up our own kind of local team in that market and build there. And made quite a big effort. Did localization, which was very expensive because it was quite a big game. Put like a good team together, but it didn't make the difference that we anticipated. And I think at that time we were too focused in terms of priorities on like still, okay, can we grow more in the US, etc. That we didn't really give it enough priority, because I do think if you decide on a market, it's not good enough anymore to just say like, oh yeah, we're just going to do a little bit more advertising there or something like that. That just doesn't cut it anymore. I think today even less than it used to be. So you have to kind of really think hard about like, okay, what can you do with your game in that market that will really make a difference? Yeah. So yeah, can go both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think especially when entering a very different culturally region, there are so many nuances you have to take into account, whether it's religion, sensitive subjects as it is with MENA. So if you're not part of that culture, it's very difficult to catch all those details. And we've had, like a very simple example, we've had a creative agency do a couple of ads for us in Arabic, and they did what they thought was Arabic. And when my Saudi colleagues saw the ads, they were appalled, and they said, okay, this smells from a mile like some Westerner, just some impression of a Western person of the Arabic culture, and they said it's not good, there's mistakes. And of course it's very difficult also to do the localization, because the alphabet is different, the direction is different, and there's a lot of things that can just go wrong if you don't pay attention and if you just don't know.
Yeah. I guess you guys both brought up localization, culturalization. Obviously there can be a massive cost to that. Is it essential? Is it optional?
I think it depends on the game.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there are some games where it's all about the content, and then that effort is much bigger. And there are games where it's more forgiving. It doesn't really matter as much. But at the end of the day, as we're on a Monetiser panel, I do think that localization adds to credibility, right? So, if I'm Brazilian Portuguese, and I see something in English, I can kind of get what it's about. It's a freaking game. I know, okay, press this button. There is usually enough UI that helps with that, etc. But to kind of have then also the confidence that, okay, this is the game for me, etc. Localization, culturalization, community, all of these things around the game, help with credibility. And, you very often see that, conversion rates, all these things are very, very different, in kind of other markets. And that may have very different reasons, not only that they don't have as much disposable income, and you can balance that out also with kind of your pricing, etc. But it's also that I do think that people are less willing to spend money on something where they feel like, what if there is some issue?
Yeah.
They don't even understand me. these kind of things. So I think it helps with credibility to kind of do those kind of things for every game.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, also, I mean, you always also get people who just don't speak the language, so I think it's just easier to navigate through the game, especially if you like it. But I agree completely with Oliver that it's probably the credibility. And then, of course, there is a question, like, if you want to grow your revenues, you want to engage your players, but then again, how much, like, does spending, so much money on localization, does it justify the revenues? So it's also, like, one aspect to look at before you actually move on.
Yeah. I remember at one time my head of localization told me that the goal of good localization is emotional resonance. And so it's like two different players in two different regions speaking two different languages feel the same emotion at the same time in game, which is, I mean, that's what you want to get out of games. You want to feel joy at the same time, or fear at the same time, or, whatever the emotional impact of the game is.
I think you can't immerse yourself as much in like a foreign language if you're not. I mean, if you're quite savvy in a language, then it's okay. But if it's really like a foreign language, you just cannot immerse yourself as much.
Yeah.
I think. No.
You brought up when we were talking earlier today the community aspect of language in game and allowing community to speak to each other in game and the barriers that can be broken down or put up by linguistics.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, because I do feel like a lot of the very successful games are for sure, multiplayer games. There is some shape or form of chat, etc. And then I think it's the importance there is to allow people across the world to kind of communicate with each other. So language shouldn't be a barrier, because what I've had with one of the companies I was working with, we didn't make that effort, and basically it meant that growing like a small community to something sizable was super hard, because they couldn't really find each other well enough to kind of communicate with each other, so they were basically kind of excluded from chat to a degree, and I think that's really bad. I think some of the like Forex strategy games, they've definitely put a lot of investment into that, to allow people to in chat just somebody is speaking Spanish, you just click on the translate button so you understand it's not like their language, it's some type of Google Translate or whatever, but you at least understand what that person is talking about, and that can kind of bring global community together. I think that's, for anything that is kind of has a chat component, I think that's kind of what you have to do these days.
And I think it's becoming more and more important as social gaming, like with the younger generations, it's becoming more and more of a thing. People want to play a game to spend time with their friends and with people from around the world. So it's not just for the playing of the game. So in this sense, it definitely makes sense to invest into localization.
You also brought up earlier today when we were talking about community and engagement, the more oftentimes, not to make a blanket statement, but oftentimes the more communal nature of emerging markets versus a much more individual-focused Western market. You want to add anything on that?
Yes, so for example, in the MENA market, it's, it is a collectivistic country, region, more so than here in Europe, for example. So family, friends, and social ties are I think, of much bigger importance than they are here, which also you can see in games. And the social feature is super important in games, and this is the way to engage players and retain them, and also monetize them. So, for example, when entering the MENA market, it's if it works with your game, because of course not every game, it makes sense to have a chat in a game. But if it does, then it is something to think about. And also in the top charts, it's interesting to see in the MENA region that there's 2 or 3 Ludo games which are like actually chat apps with kind of the cover of a Ludo game.
And they make millions.
And they make a lot of money, which is very interesting.
We are on a monetization panel, and we haven't really touched too much on monetization strategies in emerging markets. Again, I know we can't make a blanket statement on this is the model. How do you pick the right monetization strategy for your game and for your market?
Yeah, I think you have to acknowledge, first of all, that there is no blanket solution, right? What works in the US, and hopefully that works for your game, doesn't mean that this kind of model works across the world, right? So you have to kind of, if you look at a different market, you have to kind of look at, okay, do I believe that this monetization model will also work in another market? So if you take the typical example, you have like a game that makes most of its money from, let's say, ads. Well, in an emerging market, that's going to be extremely hard to kind of make the same kind of money from your game. So, if you then go to MENA or LATAM or Southeast Asia, etc., like the CPMs are completely different. There is less competition also for the CPM. So, you basically get like all your fill from maybe Google and then a bit of Unity or something like that. So then it's really, really hard to kind of get to some competitive CPM on monetization. So then it's like, okay, is there a different, would this even work, right? If you're IAP focused, then you have to acknowledge that disposable income in other markets is different. What does that mean for your kind of pricing profiles, etc., etc. So it is quite complex, and therefore I feel like a lot of companies are like not so sure if this is it worth kind of investing in that, and usually they very much have this idea of like, well, the game is growing, let's focus on our top markets, let's rather add another feature for the US, etc. But I do feel like these days the kind of ceiling in terms of what you can do with your game in like top markets is quite low. So I think it is worth exploring that, and but you need like evidence that it's really worth it. And that's why I think it's important to look at like, okay, are there benchmark games in your genre that are doing, what are they doing, so to say, in terms of money and in terms of how they're approaching it. Is there something that they're doing different? Because I think there is no blanket, just push the same product out everywhere. That just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think you have to generally be just open to new ways of doing things, be flexible. As Oliver said, I mean, just look at what the other apps, what the competition is doing to understand what works for them, or what they're still missing, and then just try out things as well and test. And of course, I think that, for example, like in various countries, like you will have a different share of ads, different share of in-app purchases based on the economic situation. So I think you just pretty much have to be flexible and open to different strategies.
When it comes to platforms, I know we're at a mobile games conference, but is it exclusively mobile? Is it mostly mobile? How do you see successful companies focusing their platform work in emerging markets?
Well, mobile is, I think, definitely one of the biggest chunks still, I think, all over the world. Right.
Yeah, especially in emerging markets, the share of mobile is much higher. But you also have to acknowledge, like, that's again, understanding what works maybe for you in the US, which is an iOS-centric market, may not work in Brazil, which is an Android-focused market with completely different payment profiles and all that. So I think it's really important to kind of have really understand that market that you think here's an opportunity, and then think about like, okay, this is this is what I'm going to do. So unfortunately, there is no blanket answer, but you have to make that effort, and it can pay off really, really nicely. So.
Yeah, and definitely access to mobile is nowadays is easy.
Yeah.
Across the globe.
I think if you guys each have a success story that you would be willing to share of here was the game, here was the market, and here's what we saw in terms of success. I'd love to hear that, either or both of you. It'd be nice to wrap with some success stories, and then we'll take questions.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the success stories, I kind of mentioned that earlier. So I worked for a virtual game app company out of the UK. It came originally from PlayStation Home, and we kind of started running it. It had its early user base mainly in the US, but because South America is and Brazil specifically is such a social country, where chatting and kind of playing together and sim type of games has always been very, very successful. That kind of showed some really early signs, but it was different market. It was lots of users, but low monetization, etc. But we were still able, with a real effort in terms of content, partnerships, and really a focus on the market to kind of grow that significantly and make it one of the. I think we reached top 10 grossing on Android in Brazil, and we're then in the league of Free Fire. I think at the time was at the very top, but there were a lot of those big shooter games where you know where the money is coming from, and for us being more of a social virtual world, I think that was a real achievement. Yeah. I mean, the ARPDAUs didn't grow drastically, but we had interesting partnerships, great, very local content. They felt recognized, all these kind of things. So it was quite an effort, but I think in that sense it really, really paid off. Yeah. And when we tried to replicate that in another market, in that case MENA, that did not work out. Yeah. I think mainly because of the content and partnerships where we didn't put enough effort in. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, and for us, we've actually, so we're working on a version for the MENA of a picture puzzle game, and since it's a picture puzzle game with words, everything had to be localized. Mm-hmm. Also the content, the pictures, so a lot of cultural references, taking into consideration important holidays and events like the Ramadan. Mm-hmm. So we managed to get the retention actually quite high, higher than the initial targets. So that was really great to see. And we were struggling for a while with actually the monetization and the in-app purchases. We couldn't really get that going. But then we switched to ads. So we started doubling down on ads, and at some point also using actually audio ads, which actually made a bit of a difference. So we were just trying a lot of new things, and with that we actually managed to hit a good spot. But definitely a lot of content and a lot of cultural references that I think made the difference, and of course the language.
Yeah. Willingness to iterate. I'm also hearing that too. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Well, I know we have a bit of time. Any questions from the last few people remaining?
No questions. Happy hour.
Yeah, we can all head to happy hour if not.
I got a question. Why not? So I know that you mentioned the markets that you work in, and obviously the MENA region and so on. Are there any other emerging markets that we should be looking at? You mentioned LATAM. Is there anything else that we should be considering here that we haven't touched on yet? Are there parts of Asia that we should be looking at, or how about India and Pakistan as a market? Or are there any other places that that are on your radar, even if you're not working there right now?
Yeah, Southeast Asia has always, Indonesia specifically, is a big people market, right? So you can attract a lot of people there. But again, you need to really kind of localize your game.
Sure.
Because, you know, similar to probably Saudi Arabia, you know, even I think in Saudi, people always underestimate, you know, what people understand in terms of English, because, you know, all the big whales in like Forex strategy games are all from Saudi.
Right.
So they think like, well, they spend so much money in this English-speaking game, probably people speak English there. Well, they don't. And, you know, similarly, like Indonesia, definitely, you know, it's an emerging market. Lots of people, I think 200-something million.
Wow.
So it's quite a sizable market. And, yeah, people play lots of games there. You know, if you want something more kind of English-speaking, yeah, then Philippines, but significantly smaller. But I do think there is opportunity definitely in Southeast Asia. If you're Android first, then it's probably Indonesia. If you're iOS first, then maybe more Philippines. I mean, Africa, yeah, maybe Nigeria. I mean, you have to speak with Kaley first, maybe, if there's,
Yeah,
if there's an opportunity there. That's definitely a region where I don't know enough. I always only use like South Africa as a proxy and soft launch to see like, will this be interesting or not? But in terms of markets, yeah, I think, yeah, Southeast Asia definitely is like a big people market. India is still very, very difficult. Yeah, you have to really understand. You usually have to understand the markets really well, and you know, India is different in the south than it is in the north, etc. So you really have to understand that much better.
That's interesting. Yeah. I'm sorry to carry on, but to that point as well, and also what you were saying about the Middle East is interesting, because actually we have these conversations where we sort of say like the MENA region, but actually there's so many different countries there, and each one of them requires some variation. And you know, like you were saying as well, North India and South India requires different. And similarly, promoting a game in Egypt is different from Saudi, right?
Exactly, which dialect, whether you go for the Fusha traditional language or whether you go into the dialects. But then there are so many dialects, you can't really do that because it would require a lot of work, a lot of money and time. So it's, you have to understand what would be the best course of action and understand the people and the markets and have a strategy.
Have a strategy and make it a good one. I spoke at a Pocket Gamer event a few years ago about the emerging market opportunity in India, and it's, you know, everything you're saying. It's Android first, massive population, low average revenue per user, but then a really large population to offset that. But as you're saying, it's not just north to south. Every state has a different spoken language and a different culture, different holidays. If your live ops strategy includes holidays, that's quite a few different holidays to try and incorporate. So it can be quite different to do it right culturally and linguistically in some of these emerging markets.
Sure.
But then there's quite an appetite for it because no one's really doing it. So
there's definitely room to grow,
yeah.
but very often it's just easier also to partner up with someone, whether have a team there which lives the culture, knows the culture throughout, and can actually help you work with a publisher. It's rather than do it yourself, especially when the very different culturally regions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely also something that you should always consider is like, I mean, your game needs to allow that, really. If it's very server-based and you feel like, oh, this is far too complex to kind of run different servers, etc. But otherwise, you know, going with like a publisher is not necessarily a bad idea for some of those emerging markets, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else want to ask a question?
Well, I was interested in, before you were talking a lot about localization, right? So you were talking a lot about localization, and then I was wondering, whenever you decide to go to a new market, and then of course you're gonna spend like some money in doing a proper localization, do you also ask your partner or yourself, depends who does it, to concentrate a lot in culturalization? So, or you just ask for a simple localization, or you also ask, to go the extra mile and spend more money in people that know the culture and try to do a localization, but just more looking at the culture of that specific market.
Well, that's a very good question. I think what would be a shame if you kind of do something and you only do it like halfway, so you never know what the real potential is. I mean, I was talking about like you know, I was working with that UK company. We first went into Brazil, then also tried to kind of replicate that in MENA, and the company at the time was then very much focused on like, okay, we have to grow in the US, etc. And it wasn't enough of a priority, so content kind of fell short. And you know, it didn't have the growth that we were anticipating. We didn't have the partnerships, we didn't have the content, etc. And you know, then it's self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, right? So it's like, okay, we didn't really put all the effort into it. And yeah, the results didn't show. So yeah, was it because of the other? But we never really went for it, right? So I think you have to have like a very clear plan and commitment to kind of do what you feel you have to do in that market to basically win. And then really try to go for it. Like as any startup would say, you know, you can't just dip your toe in and then say, oh yeah, no, it doesn't work. Let's move on. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, there's one over here. Got a mic. Thank you.
First of all, like a very interesting panel and discussion. I feel like also a very good question from you. I was going to ask around the same, but I feel like I could like talk about this topic like for quite a bit time. I honestly just wanted to ask you, because you were mentioning that you work in Latin market in Brazil and you try to replicate that like in MENA region, and it didn't work out. I work in marketing like in many like regions, and what I find it difficult is like especially in gaming, like what's your like go-to strategy like to evangelize or to, you know, like get the right partnerships in the region? Because I think that specifically, like sometimes I think that in order to penetrate into a market, or I think it's right or ideal to have the right partners, right? And for example, in Latam, that is an emerging market, or well, it's up for grabs. I consider that. Sometimes I have a hard time like telling people or having the right partnerships, because like I'm telling them, yeah, this is a huge industry. There's money in here, right? So how do you do that? Or what's your
I think it needs some business development effort, for sure. You need to kind of really, and you need to speak with other people. Like, okay, so what did you do? You know, if you look at like South America, you have to speak with some of the companies that have been successful there, and you know, just speak with them. I mean, that's the good thing that I like about our industry. People are open to kind of share some of their secrets, so to say. But you have to ask. But I think it's absolutely worth it. So you have to identify like, okay, who has had like a successful playbook for a specific market, and then speak with them. Say like, okay, so how did it go? What's the secret that kind of made this a success? Is this a partner that we've been speaking to that could help us or not? What are the channels when it comes to advertising? What are the potential partnerships? All these kind of things. I think you have to kind of put some effort into that, and it's not like a simple like, oh yeah, let's try this a bit and sink some money there. I think that's unfortunately the reality, is that you have to kind of put some effort in. So you have to kind of, it needs to have a sizable opportunity, right? And that's what you have to kind of really understand.
Thank you. Oh, another one. Go for it. Yeah.
It's not the last one.
Make it good. No, I'm joking. It's fine.
I hope so. Hey, thank you very much for the stories and the examples. If you were to give us like the top 3 pieces of advice that you would have for us whenever entering a new market, what will be the clear-cut top 3 for both of you?
I would say do your research. That's, I think, probably the first one. Second one is have some kind of, like, make a strategy, a full strategy. As Oliver said, I mean, if you go like halfway, if it doesn't work, I mean, you can't be exactly, surprised. So I think if you go in, if you plan for expansion, if you plan to increase your revenues in a certain market, you should really have a full strategy and a full plan and go all in. And third, I would say that do partner up with local people, whether it's a publisher or just local company
Experts.
or experts, exactly.
Yeah. And I think one more thing to add, so it's maybe top 4 then. I think you have to think about timing as well. I think that's also critical because the challenge that I've very often seen is, your game is growing and you focus on like the top growing markets, you want to double down there. If it's declining, you're like, well, should we really kind of put more effort into this? Should we look at other markets? Shouldn't we rather focus on the next thing? So I think timing, figuring out like the right time to do this is also really essential.
Which I guess is part of the strategy planning.
Yeah.
Number 2. Thank you very much. I take the top 4.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Cool. Well, I think we're probably out of time.
Yep.
Is that about right? Well, look, thank you very much. A round of applause for our panel. Madeline, Baby Food, thank you. I appreciate it. And of course, remember, I know as at the end of the day people left, but we are also recording, so people will be able to watch on catch-up if they missed it. So thank you very much for being part of that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You